Hi every pony, my name is Caramel Breeze, though I'm also known by Golden Rule, which I use while writing the Manhattan Times. I came up with the pseudonym about a year ago, around the same time I got my cutie mark. Yeah, you got that right. Trust me, whatever you have to say, I've heard it all before. I know it's hard to tell from text, but I'm an adult, 100% fully grown mare. Yet, I was a blank flake until just recently. If the fillies and colts nowadays think getting teased about being a blank flake is bad when you're a kid, they can't imagine what it would be like to be a grown pony with no cutie mark. Let me tell you, it's more than just embarrassing. It's depressing and frustrating. Why? Well, think about it. Every pony knows about the struggle of getting your cutie mark as a foal. You stress and stress and stress over what you'll get, whether you'll ever find your special talent, if you'll understand your mark when it comes. The whole shebang is a nightmare. And then you have hormones on top of that when you become a teenager. Nature is cruel that way. You'd think as an adult, ponies would be kinder. You'd think they remember what it's like from their own experiences. You'd think wrong. The taunting is a lot worse. Compassion is just a word in the dictionary, and other ponies who have their marks look at you like you're some sort of alien. How talentless must a pony be to not have a cutie mark? You hear them whisper things behind your back, or worse, in front of your face. While that's happening on the outside, internally, you're waging another war to keep hold of hope and constantly questioning your self-worth. Equestrian society puts such emphasis on the importance of cutie marks that it's easier to accept being born without legs than getting to my age without a butt tattoo. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not raging against the entire idea of cutie marks. I just wish ponies had longer memories and more compassion. I'm happy that I have it now, and that I didn't have to wait until I was a gray old mare. When I look at my cutie mark, not only am I reminded of my rediscovery of my love of literature, I'm also reminded of the pony who helped me get it. A pony whom I never expected to come into my life, and certainly never expected to help me overcome my biggest problem. The story I'm about to tell you is not completely about me. The majority of it actually centers around my Colt friend, Sentinel. If you've never met him, you're definitely missing out. He's handsome. I'm biased, I know, but he seriously is. Funny, smart, can be a bit full of himself at times, and even have a temper if you catch him in a bad mood. However, his insatiable curiosity eclipses every other aspect of him. Every time something catches his eye, he has to check it out. Granted, it doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, it can lead to trouble. It drives me crazy, but I love him with all my heart, and I couldn't be happier. We both grew up in Manhattan. Despite being born in the same city, he and I lived in separate districts. I was raised in Bridal Cove, which claims to be a district, but is actually a small island a couple of miles south of the city river. Sentinel, on the other hoof, was born right smack bang in the middle of Manhattan. His family lived in a small apartment. His father worked night shift on the docks as a cargo luggage carrier, while his mother was a stay-at-home mom. Since the family was so poor, his father had to work overtime just to support his family. I learned later that his father's name was Justice. It suited him. He was a big, brawny stallion, but so gentle and fair that I reckon he missed his calling as a police pony. My father worked overtime a lot before he joined the Cloudsdale Weather Factory. But we'll get to that later. I'm getting ahead of myself. Justice also had to be extra careful during his shifts because of the robberies that sometimes went down. Like I said, he was a noble guy who believed in the law, so when one night a bunch of air raiders turned up, he did the noble, lawful thing and tried to protect his cargo. The fight left him with broken ribs, cuts, bruises, and a horseshoe-shaped scar above his right eye. The day after the fight, Justice decided to take time off from work until he recovered from his injuries. His wife, Sea Silver, looked for a part-time job to help pay their bills while he recovered. She ended up getting a job over at the library in the city, and pretty surprisingly, got a pretty large salary for it. Things seemed to be getting back on track until another unfortunate event reared its ugly head. That family had such awful luck. 2 weeks after she started the job, she was on her way home from work when she found herself right in the middle of a full-scale spell battle between a cornered mob boss and the police. While she was able to make it out of there without getting hurt, the incident resulted in several deaths and a terrible fire. After that, it didn't take long for them to decide to leave Manhattan and find a new place to live. They looked through all the newspapers for real estate ads, but came up with nothing. Asking around didn't help either. With recent upsurges in crime and criminal unicorns willing to use magic on civilians, ponies were pouring out of the city into its suburbs and surrounding towns. There simply weren't enough homes to fulfill the growing need, which meant the little family of 3 were out of luck. Sea Silver was just about out of hope when an elderly couple came up to the front desk one cold morning, each with a bunch of books cradled in their forehooves. Like a lot of old ponies, they started up a conversation as she worked, filling up their waning years with idle chit-chat and nosiness about other ponies' lives in exchange for tidbits about their own. They came from Coppercurve, they said, a semi-rural town several miles north of Manhattan. It was a quaint little place. Not great on indoor plumbing, but they liked it. When Sea Silver mentioned that she and Justice were looking for a home outside the city, the stallion smiled, opened his saddlebag, and gave her a piece of paper. It turned out to be an ad for real estate in their town! Justice was very hesitant about letting her go check out the town alone. He didn't want anything to happen to her while she was there. Their run of bad luck had left him nervous and always needing to know exactly where his wife and son were at all times. However, Sea Silver could be very persuasive when she wanted, and eventually he gave in, though with one condition. If there were to be any trouble, she had to promise to come home immediately. Early the next day, Sea Silver packed her things and went off in a cab, Sentinel sleeping in the harness around her chest. On their way there, she saw a double rainbow that arched across the sky like a 2-lane bridge. Double rainbows aren't common, even in Equestria. I've never seen one myself, but I hear they're beautiful. Sea Silver took it as a good sign. I guess I would too if I were in her situation. I don't think I would do what she did next, though. As the cab was nearing its destination, she began to wonder if she could find the other end of one of the two. Pots of gold and leprechauns are just old mare's tales, but finding the earth end of a rainbow is still good luck, since even Pegasi don't know where they land once they're set free from the weather factory. She jumped out and followed in the direction of one of the rainbows, but fell to the same thing most ponies fall to when chasing rainbows: fatigue and the realization that rainbows move. She rented a hotel room that night. Unfortunately, while she slept, Sentinel noticed a chimney in the little hotel room, and decided in that childish way foals do, that he would find the rainbow that had made his mother sad. He crawled in and climbed up, trying to get high enough to find the rainbow. Unfortunately, his head got stuck in the flue. Sea Silver woke up to the sound of her son screaming, but no sign of him, at least until she found him dangling from the bottom of the flue. She ran down to the hotel kitchens and begged a bottle of olive oil from one of the chefs, who came back up with her and squirted the stuff all over the wailing colt from below. Sea Silver and the chef alternated squirting and pulling, until finally, Sentinel popped out. The chef had to return to the kitchens. After he left, Sea Silver ran a bath, put Sentinel in the tub, and scrubbed him clean of the sticky mix of soot and olive oil. She dried him off, and they both returned to bed, shaken and exhausted. The next day went pretty slow after the long night. Sea Silver was determined to continue her quest for a new home. She walked many streets of the town with Sentinel sleeping in his harness. Eventually, they came across a row of beach houses, a mere street crossing away from the ocean front. She paused for a moment to feel the refreshing salt breeze on her face, wondering whether she could afford a cone of French fries from one of the street vendors. When a loud horn set Sentinel squawking on her back. As his mother tried to shush him, Sentinel saw what looked like a toy boat on the horizon. Sea Silver pulled him from his harness to rock him, and was shocked when he opened his tiny wings and started flying toward the horizon. She caught him by his hind hooves and dragged him back to her.
You and those curious wings,
she said tiredly.
You're gonna be the death of me.
An ocean lover in the making, I see.
Chuckled a bass Irish voice she did not recognize. She turned to see a middle-aged earth pony stallion standing behind them, smiling at them. Sea Silver gave the stallion an inquisitive look.
You should take the little lad over to the Gatemore lighthouse before the owner gives it to somebody else. Lots of ships go past there all the time.
He pointed a hoof in the direction he had come from.
If you head up this road and keep going straight, you'll reach the coast where the lighthouse is.
Thank you. That's very kind of you.
He shrugged.
Your little one is liable to try escaping you again now that he's awake and got some sea air in his lungs. I'd hate for him to get off the coast where you can't catch him if he falls. At least this way, he can get his fill of the ocean and you don't have to worry about him.
He winked at her.
My very own mummy did the same for me when I was but a lad.
Sea Silver smiled, thanked him again, and set off. Like the stallion had said, the Gatemore lighthouse was at the end of the road. It was a big white building, solidly cemented into the ground, with black shingles on the roof that reminded her of jackdaw wings, spread wide to catch the afternoon sunshine. Her jaw dropped. It was one of the most beautiful buildings she had ever seen. Even Canterlot's elegant architecture seemed showy and ostentatious in comparison. There was a humble beauty about the old building, like an aging beauty queen who could still bring ponies to their knees with the flutter of her eyes. Sea Silver walked up to the front door and knocked. An elderly unicorn stallion opened it and gave her a critical once-over with his rheumy eyes.
Hey, what can I be helping you with, ma'am?
She explained her situation, mentioning the advice given by the Shirish Earth Pony.
Oh, that'll be old Seamus,
said the unicorn, as he stood aside to let her pass.
Loves this place nearly as much as his ma, Celestia rest her soul. If he didn't love pushing out to sea so much, I swear he'd have bought her himself long ago. So I take it you'll be wanting the grand tour.
Yes, please.
You got a towny accent on you there. You're not from around these parts.
No, we're not.
She explained briefly her purpose for visiting this part of Equestria. The unicorn raised an eyebrow.
Seamus, you old sea dog. Got her number pretty damn quick, didn't you?
Excuse me?
Sea Silver was confused.
This old lighthouse has been decommissioned. They're after setting up a new one up the coast. This place is to be sold as a dwelling, so it is.
He patted the wall.
Been in my family for generations, but I ain't got no kin now, you kin. Never married, no chillins. No brothers or sisters neither. Damn shame, but I can't be learning no newfangled electronic systems at my age. I need me a small cottage, and I plan to serve out my remaining years tending a garden.
I'm not sure I understand.
Sea Silver's eyes narrowed at his near impenetrable accent.
This lighthouse is being sold, Mom, as a dwelling.
A dwelling.
Hi, Mom. A house. A home.
She stared around her, breath momentarily stolen.
A home.
He introduced himself as Brightbeam and showed her everything from the bottom of the lighthouse to the top. Sea Silver's curiosity was piqued as she marveled over and over, wondering whether or not she really could refurbish it as a home.
You're after liking the old girl, then?
Brightbeam asked with a smile.
Yes,
Her face fell.
but we could never afford something this grand. I thought we'd be buying a cottage. It's about all we can afford.
She shook her head.
Maybe someday we could work our way up to something like this. I'd certainly love to live by the sea.
Sentinel gurgled.
And my little one would love it too.
Brightbeam stroked his chin.
Tell you what. After striking a deal with you.
What?
You wanted a cottage. I know where there is one. I know the owner's looking to sell. You can get it for a song. You buy that cottage, and I'll swap you the lighthouse for it.
Sea Silver gasped.
You're serious?
No, I'm Brightbeam.
He winked.
But I say what I mean, and I mean what I say, Mom.
She hugged him so tight, his eyes nearly popped out of his head. And the rest, as they say, was history. Justice came up north, proud of his wife for her victory. As luck would have it, a parliamentary tussle cut off funding for the new lighthouse when it was not even halfway built, and the council had to reinstate the old one and its new owners. Justice manned the lighthouse, changing his shifts to 3 a.m., until Sea Silver maintained it during the day. With this routine, they officially became the new maintainers of the Game Moore Lighthouse. As Sentinel got older, his curiosity grew as well. He began to examine things in much greater detail. He would sometimes sit for hours watching the sunset over the horizon from the top of the lighthouse. He would inspect every inch of the area, from the wooden floor to the ceiling. One evening, when his father was sniffly and drag-winged with oncoming feather flu, Sentinel wondered how the controls of the lighthouse worked, and if he could turn on the light for his father to save him climbing all the stairs to reach the lantern room. Sentinel hopped up the stairs with the effervescence of youth, and searched the room for any switch that would turn the lamp on. All light bulbs had a switch, he thought. He could see no reason why a giant one wouldn't. Unbeknownst to him, a dense fog was beginning to surround Copper Curb. Finally, he pushed an unmarked purple button ranged amongst dozens of others on the panel. The lamp turned on and began to spin around. As it did so, Justice staggered into the room, coughing and wheezing from the long climb.
Son, did you turn on the lamp?
Sentinel nodded and flinched, expecting his father to yell at him.
You just saved those sailors' lives in the fog.
Justice pointed out of the window to the dim shape of a boat pulling out into the harbor.
They would have fetched them on the rocks if you hadn't done that.
He tipped his head at Sentinel's flank.
Seems something else fetched them on you, too.
Sentinel stared in disbelief at the picture of a magnifying glass on his flank. He had finally received his cutie mark! He jumped up and down, grinning from ear to ear. It was one of the happiest moments in his life. After he got his cutie mark, he began to wonder about the things he feared. Things he wasn't supposed to do for what they could do to him. He figured that if he could only understand how those things worked too, he would no longer fear them. It was a logical idea. Unfortunately, it was also one that got him into a lot of trouble. One day, while he was exploring the yard, he spotted a beehive near some wild rose bushes. He flew up to the hive, but rather than attack it, he hovered nearby, asking each bee that came out if he could have a taste of their honey, until the bees started stinging to drive him away. Another incident happened a few days later while he was out on the shore. He had seen crabs eating seaweed and decided to try it for himself. He liked how it tasted so much that he ate until he got sick, and his mother had to carry him home. Later, when he had recovered enough, he had to beg for forgiveness for throwing up into her mane. Sentinel's curiosity grew and grew by the day. Since word spreads quicker through a small town, it didn't take long for other foals to catch on. And, as is the way with foals, his differences made him a target. All too often he was lied to about places they knew he would want to explore, or when they dared him to do things they were too scared to do themselves. They laughed at him more times than I like to think about. Not with him, but at him. One day, one of the foals told Sentinel about an abandoned barn they believed was haunted. They dared each other to go inside, but none were brave enough. There were many rumors surrounding that barn. The most common was about a farmer who accidentally stabbed himself with his own pitchfork while chasing oxen, fillies, and colts who were playing about in the hayloft. After hearing this story, Sentinel wanted to see if it was really haunted or not, so he decided to check it out for himself. He invited some other foals to come with him, but as soon as they stepped inside the barn, they were spooked by a screeching barn owl. Sentinel came home covered in cuts and bruises from the madcap escape, and had to promise his mother he would not go ghost hunting again. A few months later, Sentinel discovered the broken remains of an abandoned seaside fort that was dug into a face of a cliff. He kept going back to it, bringing a lantern and yarn with him each time. He later convinced a few other foals to go with him. The fort not only became a clubhouse for them, it also became a land to explore for Sentinel and his new friend Darning. Meanwhile, Justice began building extensions onto the lighthouse, refurbishing the inside and improving the structure as a whole. Sea Silver began experimenting with the seaweed Sentinel had eaten, and found it to be edible in small doses. She started harvesting seaweed and drying it as a backup food source. She would later powder it and use it as a flour for breads and wafers. During the following months, Sea Silver fell pregnant with their second foal. Since there were no hospitals in Coppercurb, they had to return to Manhattan, the nearest big city, for the birth. Justice had to temporarily hand the lighthouse duty off to the original owner until they came back. He was understanding and even offered to look after Sentinel while they were away. A couple of days later, in the comfort of a maternity ward, Sea Silver gave birth to Nightwatch. The little foal was a spitting image of his father, who cooed over the tiny bundle with all the joy of a proud parent. When they returned to the lighthouse, Sentinel told them that a sheriff had chased the foals out of the fort while they were gone. He had not been allowed to play out while his parents were gone. Instead, he had stayed in the lighthouse and talked with Brightbeam, listening to the old Stallion's stories and learning more than he thought possible about lighthouse keeping. Feeling responsible, Sentinel planned one last exploration of the place with Darning. However, when they got there, the fort was gone, and in its place was a vineyard. The two Colts were sad to see that their place was gone, but there wasn't anything they could do. This is where my family and I come in. Justice had met my father's steam engine while he was on one of his delivery ships to the Cloudsdale Weather Factory. My dad was a mechanic over at the factory. Like Justice, he had to work overtime in multiple jobs to support us. He originally had his own business when I was small, but had to close it due to the per diem jobs he was getting. To make ends meet, my mom, Olive Branch, started working as an artist for some of the company billboards in Manhattan. She also earned extra bits drawing portraits for Bridal Cove tourists at local fairs and festivals. Her artwork has always been beautiful, though I'll admit I'm biased. I could never understand why she wasn't spotted by some talent scout so we could all be whisked away into some better life of wealth and never wanting for things like food, heating, or a non-leaky roof over our heads. Sorry, I'm getting off topic again. A few months after closing down his business, a close friend of my father's got him the job at the weather factory. After a year of working there, his speed and efficiency earned him the nickname Grease Monkey. My mom would call him that sometimes, and he would laugh and chase her around our kitchen until we were both too tired to do more than sit in chairs, while I carefully fixed hot drinks for them. Jeez, I'm almost making it sound like everything has been flowers and rainbows. Just to clarify, it hasn't always been that way for my family. There are so many terrible things I could mention, but if I listed them now, it would take forever. I'll save that story for another time. Anyway, when Justice and my father met, they hit it off right away. A short while later, they started hanging out together at coffee joints or political meetings. Justice later learned where my father lived, and they had made plans for him to come down for a visit. When Justice visited, he was introduced to my family, my mom, my sister Crystal Ball, my brother Pixel Pipe, and me. I greeted him with a friendly smile and a bounce in my step. As a filly, I was incredibly energetic. I always loved making new friends with every pony I met. I wasn't always like that, you understand. There was a time when I was scared to be around other ponies besides my parents. When I was a toddler, I was very introverted. Whenever we would have company over at our house, I used to run away if any pony ever got close and tried to touch me. I would also crawl into a corner if there were too many ponies in the same room. My parents also found out that I couldn't put two words together. Whenever I spoke, it would be one-word utterances. They were rightfully confused and worried about me. They took me to many doctors, but neither of them could figure out why I was acting this way. I wasn't properly diagnosed as a kid, so when they took me to a special doctor, he couldn't pinpoint what mental disability I had. He just placed me as multiply disabled. Despite that deterrence, my parents were determined to help me in any way they could. They had hired a speech therapist to help me. After a couple months, I was able to complete a full sentence. The only speech problem I have now is the pauses I have between sentences. If I speak too fast, too slow, or try to read long paragraphs, I would constantly trip over my own tongue. I know it's hard to tell, but if you were talking to me face to face, you would pick up on it. In order to get me out of my shell, my parents would take me to many playgrounds to play with other foals. They would even join them if I still stood in one place. But no matter what they did, it didn't work. However, that didn't last forever. My antisocial behavior changed when I met my best friend, a Pegasus Colt named Gigabyte. He was medium gray, with a ruffled medium brown mane and dark brown eyes. As we got to know more about each other, his outgoing personality started to rub off on me, and we became inseparable. We've been friends for many years, and we still are to this day. I thought that I had known everything about him, but I later learned about his temper. When we were kids, Gigabyte was very protective of me, especially when it came to the bullies who would try and taunt us. His temper was very rarely present, until the one day he got into a fight with one of the bullies, Ice Storm. At first, they started teasing the both of us and calling us blank flanks. Typical bully stuff. However, they had lost interest in taunting Gigabyte and had instead focused their teasing on me. They had made fun of the way I spoke. They would call me stupid and told me that I couldn't say a single word without making a fool out of myself. Those things they said had hurt me, and Gigabyte knew it did. He had tried to hold his temper back. He told them to leave me alone, but they ignored him. Suddenly, Ice Storm said something off color to me. I don't remember what he said, and I guess it's a good thing. Gigabyte leaped at him and punched him right in the muzzle. Ice Storm got up, a bit dazed from the hit, and jumped onto Gigabyte. The other fillies and colts in the playground had started gathering around us, as they watched on in horror and confusion as the fight continued. Then, I saw Ice Storm tackle Gigabyte to the ground. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped onto Ice Storm and grabbed his tail in my teeth. I pulled on it, trying to get him off my best friend. Ice turned around and had meant to push me off of him, but had unintentionally punched me. When he realized what he did, he froze. Gigabyte and I later learned why he wore that expression, but that is another story. After the fight, our teacher, Miss Buttercream, had given Ice and Gig a week's detention as punishment. I still got teased from time to time by Ice, but he never hit me again. I also learned how to stand my ground. I also became a little braver.
Daddy, can we go see Sentinel and Copper Curb? Please, please, please!
I bounced up and down excitedly, eager to go meet new ponies. Copper Curb was further up north past the city. It would take us a couple hours to fly up there. Something danced across my father's face, pirouetting through his memories. When I was still a baby, we went on vacation to the gorgeous city of Philadelphia to see my grandparents. That was 8 years ago. We hadn't been on vacation since.
I guess it is about time we took some time to ourselves,
He admitted.
All work and no play makes a dull pony.
My mother attested. I jumped on top of my dad and hugged him, nearly knocking him over.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you!
The following week, with a diaper bag and hoof, we flew off for Copper Curb in the small hours when the moon hung full in the sky. My sister Crystal was sitting on our mother's back, gazing at the view. She made some chirps and squeaks as she looked up at the clouds and the birds flying past, and awed a little when the mare and the moon hove into view. Crystal is nonverbal. Like me, she has been disabled since she was a toddler. When she was younger, she also wouldn't allow any pony to get close to her or touch her. Even though she couldn't talk in sentences, she had other ways to communicate. One was sign language, in which she would use many parts of her body, including her wings, to tell ponies what she wanted or how she was feeling. Crystal also made a few distinct noises to let other ponies know how she was feeling. She made chirps and squeaks when she was happy. When she was angry, she would screech and whine. My little brother Pixel was sleeping peacefully in a harness that was strapped to our mother's chest. The flight there was surprisingly calm and peaceful. I sat on my father's back, letting the cool night air keep me awake. There was no air traffic, which made it easier for my mom to stop and feed Pixel from time to time on the way there. When we reached Copper Curb, thoroughly exhausted from the long trip, we rented a hotel room and fell asleep as soon as our heads touched the pillows. I was the first one to wake the next morning. I carefully got off the bed I shared with my sister and brother, making sure I didn't wake them up, and jumped onto our parents' bed.
Dad, are you awake?
No answer. I tried again, a little louder.
Dad?
Silence. I gently tugged on his ear. When that didn't work, I tried shaking him. His eyes opened. I let out a little squeak as he started tickling me. I laughed until the tickling finally came to a stop. He affectionately ruffled my mane and got off the bed. After we had breakfast, Justice met us at the hotel and guided my parents down the road. We turned down the right fork until we reached a lighthouse near the end of the road. I was so excited that I jumped off my father's back and ran straight to the front door. It opened as soon as I was on the porch. Justice's wife stood in the doorway, holding her baby in her forelegs. She smiled down at me.
You must be Caramel Breeze, am I right?
Her voice was warm and calm. I nodded.
Yes, I am. Is Sentinel here?
She smiled again.
Yes, he is. He's out on the shore looking for some more seaweed. Sentinel helps me harvest it.
I cocked my head. I was about to ask why they would harvest something like seaweed, but decided against it.
Oh. Okay. Thank you, Miss.
Sea Silver.
Oh, thank you, Miss Silver.
I smiled at her and ran off towards the shore. Once there, I walked around looking for Sentinel. I realized that I wasn't paying attention to where I was going when I tripped over something and went sprawling into the wet sand. Coughing and sputtering, I looked up and found myself gazing into the orange eyes of a Colt. He looked at me with gentle concern, and I coughed sand into his face and up his nose. That was how I met Sentinel. Not exactly Ponyo and Juliet, is it? At first glance, he was one of the most colorful ponies I've ever seen. He looked kind of like a rooster in pony form, light tan with a red spiky mane and a dark green tail. On his flank was a picture of a magnifying glass.
Sorry.
I got unsteadily to my hooves, burning with embarrassment.
Hi there. I'm Caramel Breeze. Are you Sentinel?
He brushed the sand off his face and looked at me with a surprised and somewhat defensive expression. His features eventually softened as I explained to him about our father's friendship and how I heard of him. He confessed that his dad had told him about me, and shyly asked if I would like to go for a run. He said that it would be a great way to get the sand out of my mane and tail. We spent the day chasing each other up and down the shoreline and collecting plenty of seaweed for his mother. We had a blast. Unfortunately, all too soon, my family had to leave for home, and that meant that the two of us wouldn't be able to see each other for quite some time. Before our departure, we exchanged addresses and managed to keep in touch with each other. That is, until we would lose contact for a little over a decade.